Welcome back to another episode of Accept, Then Achieve. I'm so honored to have our guest today with us. Could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Dina Schmid. I am a public speaking coach and an etiquette instructor. I started Queen City Etiquette about 6.5 years ago and have really worked to help people improve their confidence as professionals.
Wow, lovely. Can you share a bit just where you're from and how you got into this work you're doing now?
Sure. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. That's where the Queen City etiquette comes from. It's one of several cities across the US that claim to be the Queen City. My background is actually as a chemical engineer. When I was 17, this is a story that might be familiar to some people listening. Everyone told me, "You're good at math and science. You should be an engineer." Even though I loved chemistry, wanted to be a chemistry teacher, I went and became an engineer, a chemical engineer. Didn't love it. Made it an industry for quite some time, but eventually I just didn't want to do it anymore. I ended up homeschooling my children, really loved teaching. I taught chemistry as an after school type of program. I did some co op teaching and eventually ended up working on a congressional campaign where I used what I knew about helping people learn in order to be able to help her prepare for a debate. I got referred to help someone else for their campaign and then even a third political candidate. I didn't want to go down that path of being in politics so much. So I ended up just going broader, getting the etiquette certification, and have been helping people ever since to improve their confidence in how they speak at work.
Amazing. And I know, oh, what inspired you to come onto this podcast in the first place?
Well, when I saw your mission, it really clicked for me. I really identify with the people that you're reaching because I see them a lot in my work. I have identified some patterns of speaking, self deprecation, where people think they're maybe being humble, but they don't come across as that. And what they're doing is bringing down the confidence they have in themselves subconsciously and also undermining the confidence others have in them. And I see that pattern, and I know it comes from a background from the way you're raised a lot of times. And I want to help people overcome that.
Amazing. And I think that's amazing too. What a unique gift that you're giving us with this podcast, just sharing some of your wisdom here. I think a lot of that comes either culturally, you're supposed to be humble. I know I was raised that way, never brag about yourself, but that ends up being you just never take up any space and you don't know how to advocate for yourself. And you may come off as less qualified than you actually are to people in
I
business
actually
or at
sometimes
work.
call it making yourself small.
Yes, literally.
And it
And
even can relate to physically. People's shoulders roll in. They don't have that upright, open, confident posture. They find themselves kind of shrinking down a little bit, even. It,
mhm,
it affects so much. Absolutely.
yeah. So I guess I just wanted to ask you, what can you share with our audience? I mean, we have 30 minutes, but it's just whatever you are up for sharing. Just my,
Sure. Let's talk about some of the most common ways that people undermine that confidence. And
Mhm.
the number one that I always point out is over apologizing. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh,
I'm
I'm
guilty.
sorry for this. I'm sorry I'm late. I'm sorry. You might bump somebody's elbow and say, I'm sorry. Okay, that's one thing. But how many times have you said things like, I'm sorry, but I have a question? Why
Ooh,
are you sorry that you have a question? It really shouldn't be that way. And I would encourage everyone to get on YouTube and Google the Pantene Sorry Not Sorry commercial. It's actually the best example I have ever seen of highlighting, and in this case, highlighting women who tend to over apologize. And that I'm sorry, I have a question is in there.
wow.
This is the number one thing I see. People misspeak, they say the
Mhm.
wrong word. Has anyone been harmed by the fact that you maybe made a grammatical error? No. They're not no one's going to be harmed. There's no need to apologize for that. Just correct yourself and go on. So this is always the first thing I point out. And this one oftentimes just is a matter of eliminating it.
Mhm.
You don't really substitute other things, you just get rid of it. Now if you are truly in need of apologizing, absolutely you should apologize. I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings. Those kinds of things still need to be said. But instead of saying, I'm sorry, I have a question, just say, I have a question.
Hmm.
If you misspeak, don't say, oh, I'm sorry. Just restart the sentence, correct yourself, and move on. You can also sometimes change things if you're just a little bit late. Instead of saying, oh, I'm sorry, I'm late. Thank you for your patience. You can also combine the two if you're uncomfortable leaving out the I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm late. Thank you for your patience. But you flipped it. You don't leave with the I'm sorry. You leave with the thank you, recognizing that somebody else has done something for you by waiting for you. So that's the one that I always tell people to start with. Recognize if you are an over apologizer. And what do you think the message is, Tony, that it's sending to yourself and to other people if you over apologize?
I think it's saying, I am a burden. I don't deserve to be here. There's something wrong with me.
Right. It
Bad
puts you in a
messages.
lower position.
Yeah.
It doesn't really resonate confidence. And I want to stress here with a lot of these things, it's important to recognize that the intent and the interpretation are often different. I like to say that intent is one thing, but interpretation is everything. So your intent
Mm.
may be to humble yourself, it may be something else, but the interpretation is just like you said. And it lowers your position. It doesn't make you seem very confident. So that's why I always tell people to start with that one. Become more hyper aware. Listen to yourself. When was
Mhm.
the last time you truly listened to yourself? And don't listen to yourself and say, oh, but I hate the sound of my own voice, because I hear that all the time too. But make sure you are not over apologizing. You're not saying I'm sorry where it doesn't need to be.
I
So
really love
that's
that.
that's the first one I start out with.
Thank you. I'm just thinking on that. I think when I say I'm sorry, I have a question. I think I mean I'm sorry to interrupt. I have a question. Is that okay to say, or it's still just
I still wouldn't do
breathing?
it. Why
Yeah.
are you
Why
sorry to
say?
interrupt? And don't even think of it as interrupting. You're interjecting. Interrupting completely derails something. It sends it off topic.
Mm,
Interjecting is just being heard.
I love that. Thank you. I
So
didn't
think
know.
of it more as interjecting. You have a question. There's no wrong question. People say, "Oh, I have a stupid question." No, you don't have a stupid question, which we'll get to that type of wording in a minute.
Okay.
We'll
Yes.
get to
Yes.
that later. That's coming up. That's going to be number 3. But
Okay. What's number two? Please go
so
on.
so number 2 is self-deprecation when somebody pays you a compliment.
Hmm.
So let's say you did a presentation and I came up to you afterwards and I said, "Oh, I really loved what you had to hear. I think you did a great job." And you respond with, "Ugh, no, but I messed this one part up, or I should have said this." What message is that sending?
That you're wrong. That your
Right? You're
perception
you're
of it.
telling you're telling me I'm wrong, first of all. And
Mhm.
I don't want to hear that I'm wrong. If I'm paying you a compliment, to be told I'm wrong is a little insulting.
Mhm.
And then subconsciously, you're telling yourself I'm not worthy of the praise.
Yeah.
And that is tearing down your confidence as well. And this one, there's an easy fix for this one. And I will admit, this is something I have been guilty of throughout my whole life. And it took me until I was quite the mature adult to be able to accept praise with just thank you. That's it. That's all you say.
Mhm.
Thank you. It takes a while. I want anyone listening who is recognizing these patterns of speaking to be kind to themselves, to give themselves grace when it comes to making these changes. You have spent a lifetime building up these habits, these patterns of speaking. They are not going to change overnight. It will take time. I'd like to tell people that it's a process that can be frustrating at times too, because first you have to be aware. You can't change any behaviors or patterns of speaking until you're aware of them. So once you're aware of them, good job. You're already making progress. Then comes the frustration where you hear yourself saying it, but you can't stop it.
Mhm.
And then you start to stop yourself. There may be an awkward pause. There may be a little bit that comes out to start. but you've stopped yourself from saying it. And then finally, you reach the point where you just automatically say thank you. You just ask a question or correct yourself without an I'm sorry.
I love that. Sometimes it's so hard to get rid of things and not do something. I feel like when I was trying to change my speech and improve, or I sometimes clenched my fist, like I had to do something to keep my mouth from moving in the usual way or from speaking too much.
There are all sorts of techniques. I can tell you I have a whole bag of tricks that I use with students. Some of them are nice and some of them are a little bit more painful for when somebody comes to me and says, "I need to improve by a big major presentation I have next week." I have some methods that are a little bit more drastic that we can use. But it's best if you can do this on your own, the self journey. It will take time and it will take involve those steps that I just laid out.
Mhm,
So number 1 is definitely the over apologizing. Number 2, the self deprecation. Those two I find to be good first steps to
mhm,
eliminate. Number 3 is one that is a little bit harder to eliminate, but I think once you've eliminated the first two, it starts to make a lot more sense. And that is stuff like, I have a stupid question.
mhm,
I know you're more of an expert than I am. However, I'll call it prefacing, where before you actually speak your mind, you give people reasons not to listen to you.
mm.
Have you ever heard somebody speak like that?
All the time.
Mhm. Right. And what do people say? Things like, I know this is a silly idea, but maybe we should consider. It's harder to get rid of that, but it really does help a lot. I know I'm going to date myself on this one, but there's the movie Thelma and Louise from a long time ago. Maybe somebody listening has seen it. Gina Davis was in it and Susan Sarandon. Gina Davis talked one time in an interview a few years ago about how hearing Susan Sarandon talk changed her life because
Mm.
Susan Sarandon was the first woman she'd met who didn't do the prefacing, who just
Wow.
spoke her mind. And Gina saw how it affected the way people reacted to Susan Sarandon. So she changed it and her career went up as well.
Amazing.
It really can make a difference. I've had lots of students tell me that this thing makes a difference. I remember one woman I worked with telling me that she was always afraid to ask for a report from someone who was supposed to give it to her weekly.
Mhm.
Hey, and she would do what she thought was politeness.
Right. The softening.
Softening. Hey, I know you've been busy lately and I understand you might not be have gotten to it yet, but could you please send that to me? And he goes through this whole prefacing before just saying, I need that report. Well,
Mhm,
after working with me, she said she tried it. It was scary. It was really scary for her to just send an email to him one day saying, I need that report by Friday. And you want to know what happened?
she
She
got
got
the
the
report.
report. So too often we think we're going to be more polite with this prefacing. That's our intent,
Mhm,
but our interpretation of it comes across as not as more timid, not assertive, not confident, and it dismisses what we have to say.
mhm.
And along those lines are the little cushion words. Maybe, perhaps, just, all of those little
Consider.
words.
Mhm.
Hmm. I can see you're nodding a lot to this, that this is something you recognize. Now, this is one that's easier to remove from your emails and your writings first.
That's true.
Change the change the pattern of the way you write, and it will sink into your brain and eventually change the way you're talking. But I want you to think of all these little words as if they're a layer of bubble wrap. And I add a just, a maybe, perhaps, and I wrap bubble wrap on, and then another layer of bubble wrap. And now I throw this thought, this idea at you, and it's so cushioned, it has no impact.
Mm.
People sometimes even miss the main thing you're trying to say. So if you use a lot of those words and or you use the prefacing, that's how somebody else gets credit for your ideas. You say, well, I know this is a silly idea, but maybe we should perhaps consider launching this new idea. And people are like, okay, whatever, all right. And next day, somebody says, I have a great idea. Let's launch this new idea. And everyone says, that's fantastic. And you're silently sitting there thinking, that was my idea. Why isn't anybody giving me credit? I said that yesterday. Why is this person getting credit? Well, you said it, but not really.
Mhm. I love that analogy, the bubble wrap. Yes, it's we're so afraid of hurting others potentially or offending them that we protect, protect, and then yeah, it just loses itself.
It loses its
Ultimately.
impact.
Mhm.
You really aren't letting people know what you actually are thinking. And again, this is an intent versus interpretation one. Our intent is to be polite, but the interpretation comes across as not confident. When you say, maybe perhaps we should consider this stupid idea, people dismiss it. It doesn't sound like a good idea. But if you were to come out and say, hey, I have an idea, aim for neutrality. If you're uncomfortable going the other way and swinging to, I have a great idea, aim
Mhm.
for neutrality. I have an idea.
I love that.
You
Wow.
don't have to go all the way over because sometimes it feels inauthentic if we've been brought up or just conditioned ourselves to speak in the negative for so long. Swinging all the way over to the positive is uncomfortable. So just
Mhm.
aim for neutral.
Wonderful. Awesome.
So
Thank you.
those other ones you can definitely eliminate from your speaking, some of the other ones first, but these little cushion words I recommend eliminating from your writing first. I find that to be a really good step for that. Try taking it out. And if you're really uncomfortable, Grammarly has a tone detector. And you can make sure that you don't come across as perhaps a little bit harsher than you want. It can also help you learn whether or not you're coming across as assertive or confident.
I never knew that. They have a tone detector for your voice or for writing?
For writing.
For
For
writing.
for writing. Yes. So that's why it can help you eliminate those things with writing and make sure you're still being polite. There are other ways to be polite.
Mhm.
And still use please. Could you please send that report over by Friday? Okay.
That's true. Have you been finding this happens more for women than men?
It does. I find that it tends to be women. However, it's still, in my best guess, about only 85% women. I do
Mhm.
occasionally get men who also have these same issues. And I find it is a self esteem cultural issue where
Mhm.
a lot of times it's their upbringing.
Yeah, definitely.
As we mentioned earlier, it's being brought up to not be heard, to not take up space, to be small, to not shine.
Mhm.
Well,
Definitely.
sometimes you need to be. They hired you at work because they value your opinions. They want to hear them. You need to speak up. Or for someone like yourself in an entrepreneurial space, the only way to succeed is to be seen and heard.
Mhm. Definitely. And I think many people in the audience have not only been conditioned to be small, but also from their experiences, they've experienced trauma of actually people getting offended when they're just being themselves, even being neutral. And that we take those memories and experiences and then we censor ourselves after that because we just don't feel safe. Yeah.
Right. And sometimes it is difficult when you are reliving that moment in your head over and over again, and you fear that the next time you speak up, it's going to be the same experience.
Mhm.
Oftentimes we are too afraid to try out new things. And so I would encourage people to just make those small steps. Take away the over apologizing first. Edit the emails to remove those small little words. Those are baby steps, but they are steps in the right direction. Another one that can be easier to remove
Mhm.
is, did that make sense? Have you ever spoken and said that at the end? Are you guilty of that one?
Yes. Or is that okay? I used
Is
to,
that,
is that
yes,
okay?
where you're seeking some kind of affirmation or
For
approval?
approval. Mhm.
Hmm. Not necessary. Well, this is one where, again, your intent and your interpretation are completely different. So your intent may be to get a little affirmation. It could just be habit. Did that make
Mhm.
sense? Is the way you end everything. Well, the interpretation of that at best is that you were uncertain of what you said. May that perhaps you don't actually know what you're talking about. Whereas at worst, the interpretation on this one can go to an insult to the person you were speaking to. It's as
Mm.
if you're telling them, I'm not sure you're capable of understanding. And I'm guessing that's never the intent of did that make sense? But I do know that that can be the interpretation. I go around and I do some workshops for local companies, well, I'd say regional as well. This actually came up in a workshop that I did this past summer. We were talking about the did that make sense ending, and one guy immediately starts speaking out who says, I hate when people say that to me. He said, I hate that they're insulting me. He goes, they keep acting like I can't understand, like I'm not capable. So he actually voiced what I had been teaching people as far as that might be interpreted as insulting your audience. And he vocalized it in this workshop. So there are people who really do think that it's an insult to their intelligence when you say that. This is an easy one to remove
Mhm.
as far as there being a substitute. As far as the habit goes, it can be a little bit harder, but this one has an easy substitute. Any questions?
Perfect. Yeah, that actually came to mind right before you
That's
said
it.
that. Yeah,
And it sounds
great.
simple, but when you have that habit built up over such a long period of time of simply saying over and over again, does that make sense? Did that make sense? That makes sense. It's a little bit harder. And so this is when I would encourage people to build in to a presentation. If you're going to be doing a presentation for someone, build in a slide that says any questions so you can prevent yourself from saying, did that make sense?
Yeah. And I will say with that, because well, I don't think I said that one specifically, but checking, I think the intent again is good that you're checking for understanding, that you want to make sure everyone's on the same page. And
Mhm.
yeah, how interesting it could be lost or shuffled in translation to the interpretation part. So thank you. Yeah, I love that. Any questions? So what about any substitute for the is that okay or is that okay with you?
Sure. You can always ask, what do you think?
Okay, I love that.
Which is not asking for any type of approval,
Or
but rather just
permission.
throwing it up. It's your turn to speak. What are your thoughts on that? Hmm.
I love that.
That's another way to put that one. Again, it's just neutral. I spoke, your turn to speak.
Yeah.
And you want that equal playing ground, that leveling there, and
Mhm,
things like, did that make sense? I'm sorry. The over apologizing will
mhm,
decrease your level a little bit. It makes you not on that same level as the other person you're talking to. Those
mhm,
things can be small, but they chip away at your confidence. They chip away at the confidence others have in you repeatedly on a daily basis. It's it's not an easy fix, but yet these small little changes that build up over time
mhm,
will make a big impact.
mm. I can see that already just from the last 10 minutes of you sharing. So thank you. Just shifting gears, I wanted to just learn more about you too. Did you struggle with that self-esteem or with, um, sorry, expressing your voice and all of that, or was that not really too much of an issue for you?
It's been one where I would say it depends on the phase I've been in my life. You have to understand, going back, I'm going to date myself here. Having graduated from engineering school in the early 90s, there weren't a lot of women in engineering at the time. So there was a lot of pressure, and I think that did affect me. I also was raised in a household where we were raised to be more humble. There was a lot of religion. There were different things that I think affected that upbringing. So when I entered the workplace, I don't think I was quite at the same starting spot as some of my male colleagues were.
Mhm,
There was just a lot with that, and I still see that today. Actually, I work with a lot of women in tech fields who I think just don't always feel like they're heard as much. there's a lot that goes on that is cultural, not just as far as upbringing, but cultural within certain industries
Hmm.
that I think is a little bit problematic. This is not the time and place to debate that.
Hmm.
So, but for me personally, going back to that, I think that did affect me. I can remember going to visit a manufacturing plant, and I was the only woman who wasn't working on the assembly line.
Hmm.
It does kind of affect you, and I hadn't had the training. I hadn't been, I think, brought up to speak my mind. I had to find my place. I had to find my way, and eventually I did.
Hmm.
I I think that's partially what helps me help people today is having had to find my way myself. And now, sure, now that I'm older, wiser, more mature, more experienced, all of that, I feel like I can speak more confidently. I feel like I have come to a place where I'm good with that, but it wasn't always like that for me in my life.
Mm, I see. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, you're clearly a very confident speaker now. So thank you. What was most helpful for you in your journey of growth or building your self-confidence? Did you work with a speech coach yourself, or was it more through books or programs?
So I've taken classes, I have read books. I will admit that there's always been a part of me that was comfortable with some of this stuff. Going back to high school, I was involved in an exchange program. I was the one they picked to be interviewed on the TV about it. I just always was comfortable with what I would say one on one smaller group interactions, not necessarily presenting in front of a large crowd. That took time. That was the one piece that I had to overcome. But the one on one interaction, I was always comfortable with. I honestly would say that for me, though, most of it has just come from experience and
Hmm.
learning from experience. I follow a path that I call trial, analyze, and improve. Try something out, analyze it. Don't dwell on the negative, though. What went right? What am I going to repeat? What do I keep doing? And looking for one thing to tweak and improve as you move forward. And that is really, I think, what has brought me here is continuing trial, analyze, and improve. Okay, this went well in these things, but I'm going to make this change.
I love
Learning,
that.
maturity, all of those things combined.
Hmm. That's like the TAI method. That's lovely. For your career transition, because what you do now is so different from what you started out in, what was that like navigating that? Was there doubts? It sounded like things flowed if it was from referrals and it was a natural course. And
It flowed, but it took time. The first year was a little bit rough. My first group class, I had two paying students, and so I recruited friends and other people so that it would look like it was more popular. Because I didn't want those two paying students to think they were the only two people that were interested in this. So it took a little bit of growing pains at the beginning. Now it's going well, but the path also required me to get over my fears and self doubt of starting my own business. I had
Mhm,
always worked for someone else, I had always done what I was told to do. And starting my own from scratch was a little scary. Honestly, it was, especially because I had taken some time off to raise my kids and was getting back into the workforce at this point.
mhm.
It was nerve wracking. Hmm.
Yeah, wow. I wonder what would be your biggest lessons or pieces of advice to the audience or your younger self?
Sure. I think one of the things I did wrong at the beginning was not set up boundaries, not treat myself as a professional when I was first starting out. It took
Mhm,
me a while to be able to establish those boundaries. And once I got those boundaries, I just was so much more comfortable and relieved. And
mhm,
I felt like I was able to do my job better. It sounds a little contradictory to this idea that saying no to things made me better able at saying yes to other things, but that's really what was necessary. I had to learn to say no to certain things. I might have been desperate for work, but did I really need to take on a group or a student Friday night at 8 p.m. when I should be spending time with my family? And
mhm.
learning to say no to that was difficult, but it really did help.
Love that. Thank you. Just going back to your work, you've shared so much already. Was there any other tools, tips? I mean, the audience can implement all of this immediately afterwards, but is there anything else you wanted to share
I,
in
I
the
would
area for helping
Sure.
them?
I would tell people to work on things one at a time. You're not going to change your complete way of speaking. You're not going to become 100% assertive and confidence in your language overnight. I know I said that earlier. I want to stress this here. It is really important that you work on one thing at a time. And once you've mastered that one thing, once you've removed the over apologizing, move on to the next one. Slow and steady wins the race. We want these changes to be sustainable. You are going to need some time to do that. Another thing that can help is if you have a trusted friend, colleague, someone in your life who can point these things out to you. If you're more aware, you're going to be better able to make the changes. As I said, I have some techniques when I deal with people. My worst one, I have a bell over here beside me, and I will actually ring a bell. You're not going to do that in a meeting with a colleague. Absolutely would not recommend that. But the colleague can tell you, hey, you over apologized 3 times while you were speaking. And you'd be like, oh, okay. Or maybe there's a situation where they can do a little signal. I have some hand signals, I have some colored cards, some things I will do with students. Maybe you can have a friend help you with that. If you're in a conversation and they can tell you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, just be like, hey, raise their hand or some little gesture to let you know you've slipped and said that.
Hmm. Okay, so the bell is one of your drastic measures
The
that
bell
you
is one of
said.
my drastic ones that I will do. I have some other things. Another thing that can help is if people just slow down the rate of speaking when they're trying to change the patterns, it makes it easier to stop yourself from adding in one of these little pieces that will decrease your confidence.
Mm, that's true. Yes,
If you're
just
trying to
and
stop the just maybes, the did that make sense, have a little pause, and then your brain can click and go, that's right, I'm supposed to ask any questions instead.
mhm. Yeah, I love all that. Well, we only have 5 minutes left in the episode. Are there any final thoughts? And of course, how can people connect with you, continue the conversation, and work with you if they wanted?
Sure. My final thoughts, I really hope that people see this as more inspiration and not another person telling them they're doing something wrong because
Mhm.
you're not doing anything wrong. It's just that you could be, with that trial, analyze, improve, you could be improving. This is an opportunity for you to start making some positive changes. So I want people to make sure that they take away the message that these are positive changes. I'm not trying to tell people they're doing things wrong. Just, hey, there's a better way you could be doing this. You could be building up your confidence. So I want to make sure that people take that away and take it slow. Work on taking out one thing here, one thing there, and slowly but surely you will be speaking confidently. And I think once you hear that feedback from yourself, once you hear yourself saying thank you after a compliment, you can actually accept it. You can start to feel better and you'll see your confidence and your self-esteem going up. Now, as far as people can contact me, I will admit I am a bad social media person. I have the Facebook account for Queen City Etiquette. I don't post regularly on it. LinkedIn is probably the best place to get in contact with me. If people want, I do have a website for Queen City Etiquette, but if people want to get in contact with me, I would recommend reaching out through LinkedIn.
Right, sounds wonderful. Well, thank you so much again. Oh, and I just wanted to second what you said. Yes, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you or anyone with how we talk. It all of our intention. I think everyone has good intentions.
Oh, yes,
If
I
you're
know it's always good intention.
And yeah, but I guess if it's you're finding that it makes you feel worse about yourself, some things after a conversation or things you notice later, then I think that is worth tweaking a bit.
Hmm.
But the point of the podcast again is just being able to accept yourself exactly as you are and recognize nobody's perfect and you don't need to be perfect. It's just what are the ways that we can shift small
Right,
things with big
right.
results if we wanted that.
Right.
So
And I see something like saying thank you after a compliment as a way of acceptance too.
absolutely, and accepting all of that, yes, and accepting all the love and everything that's
Yes.
around us.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
thank you so much again for sharing your time and your wisdom
Thank you for
today.
having me. It was
And
nice talking to you.
thank you, you as well. Take care. Bye.
Bye.